Perhaps no other Greek city-state embodied the values and structure of the Hoplite Phalanx as completely as Sparta. The Spartans lived in Laconia, a region in the southern Peloponnese. Laconia was surrounded by hills, but unlike most of Greece, it contained a broad, fertile river valley created by the Eurotas River, which flowed from the north. This land provided some of the best farmland in Greece. Combined with the fact that Laconia lacked good harbours, it is easy to see why Sparta's economy was based almost entirely on agriculture well into the classical period. Sparta itself was unique. Rather than developing as a typical Greek city with dense urban buildings, it remained a cluster of villages in the Eurotas Valley. It contained temples and some public structures, but it never became a true city in the physical sense. Nevertheless, it functioned as the political centre of a larger city-state known as Lacedaemon, from which the name Lacedaemonians derives. The people of Laconia, Dorian-speaking Greeks who settled the region in the early Iron Age, became known for their conservatism. As commerce became more important elsewhere in Greece, the Lacedaemonians retained older forms of social organization that later observers considered primitive. By the 600s BCE, however, Sparta had developed a political system that changed very little afterward. The Spartans attributed their political and social order to a semi-legendary lawgiver named Lycurgus, said to have lived in the early 700s BCE. The Spartan constitution was unusual by Greek standards. Sparta retained a hereditary kingship, the basileis, but instead of one king, the Spartans kept two, each from a different royal family. Their primary duties resembled those of Dark Age kings, leading armies in war and performing key religious rituals. Most executive functions, however, were handled by other officials. 5 magistrates called ephors, overseers, supervised the kings and ensured that they did not abuse their authority. Ephors could recommend the deposition of a king, who could then be replaced by a male relative. These officials were elected annually from the citizen body and could not serve consecutive terms. The Spartan Council, the Gerousia, Council of Elders, consisted of 28 men aged 60 or older who served for life. When a seat became vacant, the existing members nominated candidates and the assembly elected the successor by voice vote. This body decided whether a king should be removed and determined which issues would be presented to the assembly. The assembly consisted of all adult male Spartan citizens. Every citizen had the same political rights, aside from the kings. In theory, this created a society of political equals, homoioi, even though the kings existed alongside them. Economically, the citizens were also equal. Land was held in common, and Spartans had no private property in the usual Greek sense. Lycurgus supposedly banned money. More accurately, he required Spartans to use heavy, low-value iron currency, which had no worth outside Laconia. Each citizen received a plot of land sufficient to support himself and his family, reinforcing their economic equality. Although this system appears equitable, only a small portion of Laconia's inhabitants were actually citizens. Out of roughly 450,000 people in 450 BCE, only about 30,000 were Spartan citizens. Around 225,000 were perioikoi, free inhabitants of surrounding towns and villages conquered by Sparta as it expanded. The perioikoi could own property, govern their local affairs, pay taxes, and serve in the army, but they had no political rights within the Spartan state. The remaining 300,000 people were helots, essentially state-owned serfs. They were tied to the land, had no rights, and belonged collectively to the Spartan polis. They worked the farmlands and produced the food that supported the citizen body. Their origins are unclear, perhaps surviving Mycenaean populations enslaved by Dorian conquerors, but in any case, they were brutally exploited. Because the helots greatly outnumbered the Spartans, there was always a risk of revolt. The only way Sparta could maintain control was through military dominance. Thus, Spartan life became entirely oriented toward war. The Phalanx was not just a battlefield formation. It shaped Spartan society, politics, and daily life. The need to control the helots and defend the polis forged a culture in which every aspect of life served the military.